So you have a whole collection of people and everybody's competing against each other, trying to stay out of jail,
exactly.
right, for the longest amount of time.
Is a large number of computer programs all competing so as to maximize their payoff. And so in the first tournament that was held, 14 computer programs were contributed. And there was one clear winner. And the one that won was tit for tat. And tit for tat just says, do unto others what they do unto you. And so I just copy your move in the last game.
So if I cooperated last time, so I'm playing you, and if you cooperated last time, then in the next game I'm going to cooperate.
Exactly.
If you defected last time, in the next game I'm going to defect
exactly.
when I play you.
Exactly. So here's this hugely complex problem, the problem of cooperation. Somehow you capture the essence of the problem in the prisoner's dilemma matrix, which is just this trivial little, 2x2 matrix. Somehow gets to the heart of the problem. And then you find that the way to do this, to win that game when it's repeated several times, is to play tit for tat and nothing more complex.
Wasn't him.
Wasn't him.
Wasn't him.
Was not him.
Was not him.
So tit for tat is interesting, but it does seem to have limitations, because ultimately it could also be in one of these anti-cooperative death spirals, if you like. I defect, you defect, I defect.
He did it.
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 That kind of idiotic solution where you simply copy what the guy did in the last round, it leads to that perpetual defection. And it turns out that when there's some noise or uncertainty, then tit for tat is not the best strategy. So when Axelrod had that tournament, it was working inside a computer, errors were never made. Right. The only uncertainty was what your opponent was going to play. But you always knew exactly what they played once they played it. But let's say that you forgot what they played. So I play you, Dan, and let's say you cooperated, and I think, God, did Dan cooperate or defect? I think he defected. So I defect, and then you defect. Now, it turns out that there's an alternative strategy that does better when the world is uncertain. And
which is closer to life, of course.
Which is much closer to life. And that strategy is called Pavlov, named after Pavlov, who did work on conditioning. And specifically on the notion of reinforcement. That if you do something good that's rewarded, you'll do it again. And if you do something bad that's punished, you're less likely to do it again. And so there's a strategy called Pavlov, which plays by the so-called win, stay, lose, shift rule. And that rule can error correct.
So it can take care of this uncertainty.
And the intuition there is that if you defect against me, I've lost, so I should shift. And so I shift back to cooperate, and then you see cooperation in the last round, and you cooperate again. And then and then you're winning, you stay on that strategy.
So you essentially want to learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
So Nash was actually solving this as a pure math problem, but in fact it has an evolutionary context. Is that right?
That's right. So in 1973, an English evolutionary biologist, John Maynard Smith, rediscovered the Nash equilibrium and called it an evolutionary stable strategy. And he was particularly interested in what limits aggression. And it turns out that if you write down a simple game, you can show why it's often the case that more passive, restrained strategies evolve. And the game that he wrote down was called the hawk-dove game.
Imagine we have two populations, one aggressive and one passive. Hawks will always fight over a resource, and doves will not fight under any circumstances. When a dove meets a hawk, the dove always backs down and gives up the resource to the hawk. And when a hawk fights a hawk over a resource, the conflict is brutal, and the winner takes all, and the loser, well, he ends up injured. The winner gets the reward for this interaction, but because he suffered a cost in the process, it diminishes the value of that benefit. We can write this out mathematically like this. The benefit of winning the resource, which is B, minus the cost of the fight to get it, which is C. Since a hawk would win about half the time, the net payoff is B minus C divided by 2. But when a dove meets a dove, they share equally with no injury. In other words, they get the benefit half the time but never pay a cost of conflict. As long as the benefit to be gained from each interaction outweighs the cost of fighting, there's a clear best strategy: be a hawk. But when the cost of fighting is higher than the benefit to be gained, the logic changes and doves can succeed. Under these circumstances, the stable population will be a mix of both hawks and doves.
And do we actually see this in the world, in any particular species patterns and
Right,
things
but
like that.
this is an interesting question, and it relates to how you map highly abstract mathematics of the sort that we're talking about to real-world empirical observations. And I would claim that this kind of mathematics conforms to that model of an intuition amplifier rather than a strategy calculator, because it's so simplified and so abstracted. It tells you why not everyone is mean and aggressive,
Yes.
but it can't tell you precisely how many will be aggressive and non-aggressive.
So this is amazing. So now we have a mathematics that is really beginning to get at the way we think. And that's what we see now in a sort of game theory applied to real economics with uncertain payoffs, for example. Game theory of evolution, where you really need inheritance and things like that. So there's still a big world out there for game theory to move into and to change for.
Right.
So thanks for coming. It's been fascinating.
Thanks, John.
Game theory can help us understand why animals evolve over time, but it can also help us understand social behavior. Before the 1960s, some scientists thought that the natural selection motto of survival of the fittest, as applied to behavior, would favor the dominance of aggressive behavior, the strong over the weak. Maynard Smith showed that the most evolutionarily stable society is one in which both hawks and doves have a role, which is why natural selection actually works to maintain a balance of different characteristics in a population.
I'm interested in discovering why animals behave the way they do, and the only way to do it really is mathematically. My name is Craig Packer. I'm a professor in the Department of Ecology, Evolution and Behavior at the University of Minnesota. Much of my research has been informed by game theory. We're at Wildlife Safari in Winston, Oregon, and we've come to see some lions and see if any of their behaviors illustrate some of these principles of game theory.
So the two males are still intact?
Yes, they are.
I started studying lions in the late 1970s on a population of lions that had already been studied for 12 years. Lions are one of the most militantly social species of all mammals. They work together to raise their babies. They often work together to hunt. Our current study area in the Serengeti is 2,000 square kilometers, and we're keeping tabs on 24 different prides of lions. It's actually the most extensive study of any carnivore anywhere in the world. I think evolutionary game theory is a very powerful tool for understanding animal behavior. With animals, you have the very simplifying situation that you never can ask them what they're thinking. All you can do is rely on the outcomes. Looks like you've got a fairly relaxed group. When is the rut?
It happened about 3 weeks ago.
That's what it's all about. I mean, the only point of being a male and being so splendid and everything is to get those splendid genes in the next generation. One of our big questions in studying lions for the last few decades has been to approach the problem of why it is that lions are the only social cat. And so we're now using a game theoretical approach. What we're finding is that sociality is much more likely to evolve in a situation where the animals live on very high quality habitat. They have water, they have food, they have places to hide, so you can reach out and grab your prey. What you get then are these singletons now becoming groups, defending those territories against anybody else. And that becomes the new ESS, the new evolutionarily stable strategy. When I first started studying lions in the 1970s, there was always a bias in people that it was a mistake ever to imbue an animal with a complex repertory of behaviors. Maynard Smith with game theory comes along and says, well, if I'm a lion, I live in a world filled with other lions. And so what I get depends on what the other lions are doing. He brought genetics into the whole story. People were convinced that lions were social because they had to work together to cooperate to catch their prey. And when we did our own research on that subject, we found that not only did they not cooperate, but if you thought about it for a few minutes, Why should they cooperate? Because every individual in every group, no matter how unified the group may appear at first appearance, everybody has their own self-interests. And as it happens, in a situation like hunting, it often is better off if you just notice that, my companion or my sister or my mother or whoever is halfway to catching that zebra. Looks good. If I just sit still, I get a free lunch. More and more data are showing that animals seem incapable of solving the prisoner's dilemma. They go for the instant gratification. If there's a mutualistic benefit, they always cooperate. If it's not immediately mutualistic, then they don't do it. I study problems, and I love the problems the lions present because they have such a complex social system and they play such a complex role in ecosystems that understanding their behavior is incredibly important. And so always it's the problem that we haven't really addressed yet that's the most exciting.
So just like with tit for tat and Pavlov, the evolutionary stable strategy provides us with a model that, in a sense, buttresses our own intuition about how the world works. Now, if we can just keep learning the lessons of game theory.
Hey, Mr. Blue, I thought you just got out.
What do you make of it, huh?
Get over here. You guys must be the worst robbers in the city. 2 days out of jail and you're back again? What's your story this time?
I don't know nothing.
30 days.
Game theory forces us to think about choices, strategies, and payoffs. Not in a way that reduces us to easily predictable individuals caught in a grid, but in relation to the activity of others. In the iterated prisoner's dilemma, it would be great if everybody played a pure cooperate strategy, since this is what would give the greatest payoff. But the temptation to cheat, to buck the system, is there. Maybe that's the point, that math goes beyond our instincts. Our instincts are often wrong, and mathematics, carefully considered, can be a guide beyond the gut. With mathematics, we can show that a common behavior that we might consider foolish can in fact make considerable sense. Sometimes these odd strategies are informally encoded in cultural norms, like the Golden Rule. At its heart, that's perhaps really what game theory is about, the evolution of these rules and norms or institutions that make the best of the difficult situation of living in our world.